This is the IBJ podcast for the week of July 1st, 2019. I'm Mason King.
Well, he's fully recovered, except for a few minor kinks.
Has he asked for anything special?
Yes, this morning for breakfast, he requested something called wheat germ, organic honey, and tiger's milk.
Oh, yes, those are the charmed substances that some years ago were felt to contain life-preserving properties.
You mean there was no deep fat? No steak or cream pies or hot fudge?
Those were thought to be unhealthy, precisely the opposite of what we now know to be true.
Welcome back to the IBJ podcast. That was one of my favorite scenes from one of Woody Allen's early movies. It's Sleeper from 1973. Woody Allen wakes up 200 years in the future, and his doctors need to tell him that everything that was believed to be healthy in the 20th century is now completely wrong.
I remember.
And the joke is that we go through this all the time in the present day. Everything you hear about health and medicine seems to be in constant flux. But amid the cacophony, there is a strong voice emanating from Indianapolis that's trying to debunk healthcare myths, clarify conventional wisdom, and filter out information from faulty studies. In the last decade, Dr. Aaron Carroll has become one of the most influential voices in the nation about health and health care, and particularly the most confusing and frustrating aspects of health care, such as insurance and malpractice, drug pricing, telemedicine, even healthcare systems in other countries. He works downtown for the Indiana University School of Medicine, but you can see the doctor now on Twitter, or on his blog, or on his YouTube channel, or in his column in the New York Times, or in the bookstore, if you can still find a bookstore. He's the subject of a terrific profile by John Russell in this week's IBJ, but we at the podcast wanted to ask him even more questions about some of the most important questions in our day-to-day lives. He has invited us to his office. Dr. Aaron Carroll, thank you so much for making time for us.
No, thank you.
Tell me what your job title is.
And
you've got like a few.
There's a few. So I mean, I guess my real one is I'm a professor of pediatrics at IU School of Medicine. Which so my first job is as a researcher, but I also serve in other roles. I'm associate dean for research mentorings, and I'm also vice president for faculty development at the Regenstrief Institute.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
To kick things off, though, we're going to do a lightning round.
Okay.
Of conventional wisdom in healthcare or newly announced study results, most of which you have recently addressed or clarified or debunked. Give me like 20, 30 seconds
Sure.
on each one of these. This one, I'm not sure if you've talked about, but I need to walk 10,000 steps a day.
There's no evidence for that at all. That's just the number that people pulled out of thin air. And there is no good science that says that, if you walk 10,000 steps that you will have any better health than people who've walked less or even more. The only evidence we have for physical activity is that we know that 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week of moderate activity is good. We know that makes a huge difference in people's lives. But more than that, you're great, but there's no real evidence that it's doing much benefit for you.
Next one. A low sodium diet will help me prevent heart failure.
So, sodium is just salt. We could talk all day. So there's really almost no good randomized controlled trial evidence, which is really what you want to make a broad recommendation about what people should do to affect their health. And when it comes to low sodium diets and heart failure, there was a recent article in the last year or two, I can't remember if it was JAMA or JAMA Internal Medicine, where they really went through and laid out that there's been almost no studies, and the ones that do exist are equivocal. There's really no good evidence. And yet, this is one of the mainstays of treatment still. It's very difficult to pull off. We just tolerate sometimes this kind of nutritional evidence to really improve health with very little data or numbers behind it.
Here's a high, fast one. From a racial perspective, the practice of medicine is colorblind.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's just study after study every week showing healthcare disparities, and that, we've known about this for decades, and there's been ARC recommendations for a long time in how we need to combat the ways that medicine is not colorblind, and that people of different races and ethnicities do get better or worse treatment depending, again, on races or ethnicities. We've made some strides, but not nearly enough.
Here's a real recent one. Wearing sunscreen can be dangerous because your body absorbs chemicals that can disrupt your hormones and be toxic to your nervous system.
So sunscreen is difficult. This made the news not too long ago because there was a study out of the FDA that showed that we do absorb the contents of organic sunscreens. Think the spray-ons, the ones that don't sit on your skin and are white. We absorb them, and we don't know if they're unsafe. Now, most of the evidence we have would say they're probably safe because we're not seeing major health problems. But the FDA is taking action, and they're now saying that by the fall, these companies have to do some research to see if these ingredients are dangerous, and if they don't, some of these things could get pulled from the shelves. But don't forget, the sun is terrible. And this is not a license to not use sunscreen. Certainly you could try UV protective clothing. You could try the sunscreens that sit on the skin as opposed to getting absorbed, but still there's not a ton of evidence that says they're really unsafe, and sunscreen is still important.
Okay. Marijuana is a wonder drug.
Well, no. Again, when we're talking about proven evidence, the evidence in favor of using marijuana in a medical way is for a few very specific purposes, most often with nausea, perhaps even pain related to cancer therapy. That's about it. Maybe a few minor other things, but we don't have a lot of good evidence weighing the risks and benefits of marijuana. Now, people should not take this to mean that marijuana, on the other hand, is unbelievably dangerous. It's also not. I mean, it's significantly less dangerous to society than alcohol is. But it's also not, this amazing risk-free panacea that will take care of everything. And often you read in the news, advocates are treating it like it cures everything. There's no evidence for that.
Yeah. Probiotics. And I'm a big kefir drinker. Probiotics are an underappreciated wonder drug.
No, see, again, it's just there's not a lot of evidence. No, I mean, honestly, the few things that we could argue that there is evidence for probiotics, even then, the new research is sort of pulling it back. Things like perhaps in the prevention of necrotizing enterocolitis in the NICU, really premature babies, or in replenishing the germs in your gut after taking antibiotics. But newer, better research is showing that even there, the evidence we have is not as strong as we think. A lot of it is more belief than reality. I tell people all the time, weigh the benefits and the harms. There's probably not a lot of harm to it. If you're buying yogurt and it makes you feel better, great. I'm not trying to remove, even if it's placebo effect, that from your life. But there's not enough evidence to start proselytizing about it or telling everyone else they should be doing it.
Chewing gum stays in your body for 7 years.
No, that was our first book. The body's incredibly efficient at getting stuff from one end to the other.
Oh, that's good news.
And if you think about it, gum doesn't stick to the inside of your mouth the same way it doesn't stick to your inside of your gut. The gut's not sticky.
When I was in 5th grade, I was like, okay, I know how much gum I've swallowed. There's no way it could all still be there.
No, you poop everything out. There are some few case reports. I mean, if small kids eat a ton of gum with stuff that's not digestible, like if they were chewing gum with sunflower seeds, you could get a wad big enough to obstruct you, but that'd be a surgical emergency. Gum does not sit benignly in your gut for 7 years. Why 7 years? Where did they come up with that number?
Red meat is bad for you.
Well, no. I mean, I'm not going to come out and say, eat all the red meat you want and there's no downsides. But the dangers of which people are often screaming about are way overestimated. One, because the studies are not nearly as good as people say. Two, what evidence there is for processed red meat, not necessarily steak, but things like bacon or prosciutto. Three, even if you buy the relative risk of 18%, it means that you have to eat an extra serving every day for the rest of your life to get an 18% increase, but that's a relative increase. I went once to the NCI and I typed in all my data, and let's say my lifetime risk of colon cancer, me, Aaron, Carroll, which I'm actually jacking it up because you have to be 50 years old to make the calculator work. Let's say it's 2.5%. Then if I commit to eating an extra 3 pieces of bacon every day for the rest of my life, which I'm not going to do, my risk will go up to what, 2.8%? That's just not as big as people say. It's not as proven, and most people aren't consuming servings with an S of red meat a day. If you're eating it healthy as part of a normal diet once in a while, you're just fine.
If I get a 14-ounce steak once a week, which I'm not going to do.
You're probably totally fine.
But I'd be probably fine.
I do it.
Okay. How old are you?
46.
What are the persistent health myths of being a middle-aged man?
Well, I think it's these things we're talking about. It's like that. First of all, we believe that food is magic, that somehow it's going to kill us or it's going to save us. It's going to do neither of those things. Salt, if you don't have super high blood pressure and you're not consuming a ton of it, is probably not as important to reduce as people say it is. And even when we do, what we're talking about is you got to worry about the salt from processed foods, not the salt you're adding at the table or when you're cooking. In the same way, fat's not nearly as dangerous as many know it to believe. I would say that, again, with exercise, I'm amazed at how many of my friends think that they have to run a marathon to be healthy, as opposed to, getting to the gym or just being that 150 minutes a week exercise. I'm also amazed at how people, for weight loss purposes, are still convinced that exercise is the way to get about that. There's no way that's not true. It's almost all nutrition. Moreover, the immediate follow-up is people saying, I don't have enough time to cook. And I'm like, you have like an hour and a half every day to get to the gym, shower, do all that, and no time at all to put into the kitchen. If you would reduce your gym time to a rational amount and then spend a little more time thinking about what you're eating, you'd probably see much better results.
Why is so much of the medical and health-related information that makes it to us in the public sphere, why is it so flawed?
I mean, there's a number of reasons. One, we get excited about the new instead of really sort of understanding about how to place stuff in context. So every study we treat it as if no study existed before. And so that way we waffle up and back. It's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad. Instead of saying, well, look, if we have 40 studies and 20 say it's good and 20 say it's bad, it's nothing. But that's not how we do it. Coffee's going to save you. Coffee's going to kill you. Coffee's going to say, it's like that's bad. Second is we don't understand the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. And so we hear these big scary numbers without understanding that in reality, it's just not that big a deal. The third is that we don't understand the difference between different types of studies. Not all studies are equal. Big observational studies are good at finding associations and perhaps helping us hypothesize about how things might be related, but you need a good randomized controlled trial or something like that to prove it's causal. And even when the causal stuff overturns the observational stuff, we don't change our minds. All of that together and more just makes us leap from sometimes wrong conclusion to wrong conclusion.
Now, why are you so smart? Why do you know more than the researchers who did these studies and on such an incredibly broad range of topics?
I mean, one is I would say like I'm a methodologist in the sense that part of my training and my work is like understanding not just how to do a specific type of research, but sort of broad research strokes in general. I mean, I have a master's in health services research on top of my being a doctor, and I spend a lot of time teaching about how to evaluate research, how to understand it, and what to do. The second thing is I think that I've spent now a decent chunk of my career not just fixated on my own work, where you can have a blind spot and are clearly biased, than in talking about other people's work where I'm less biased and more likely to try to come at it with a little more equipoise. And part of it is just that I spend so much time now doing this, trying to explain the nuances of health research, health policy to the lay public that, over time I hope that I've gotten better at it.
Do doctors need to be more skeptical, especially if they're basing care decisions on maybe what they've heard?
Everybody.
Read in the last journal?
Everybody needs to be more skeptical. And doctors are human beings just like everybody else. All this work in medical myths started in a paper we wrote for the BMJ in 2007 that was entitled Medical Myths Even Doctors Believe. And the point of it was these are common lay things like gum stays in your stomach for 7 years that people believe, and doctors are people. And so we fall prey to lots of stuff that's not true. We do stuff that's been proven wrong all the time. And a lot of times we're acting with the best knowledge that we have, but it's not perfect knowledge, and we don't adequately explain that to patients. There are times when I am sure of the advice I'm giving because it has the weight of meta-analyses or randomized controlled trials behind it, and sometimes it's our best guess. Those should not be treated the same.
Hey, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
The IBJ podcast is sponsored by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
Okay, welcome back to the podcast. I'm back with Dr. Aaron Carroll. We're talking about healthcare myths and what he does here at the Ivy School of Medicine. But let me approach it from this direction. So in any given week, you are writing a column for the New York Times. You are recording a video or videos for Healthcare Triage YouTube channel, writing a blog entry for The Incidental Economist, tweeting a heck of a lot is what I've been able to tell.
Yes, too much.
And perhaps working on a book. How much time does all of this media and social media outreach take out of your week?
God, I don't know. And I'd like to be honest with you, I truly try not to quantify it because I think it would scare me. And also because at that point I probably would feel a need to cut back. I've gotten more efficient over time because, I can take the same material we might use in a column for the New York Times and repurpose that for a healthcare triage, and stuff gets cross-posted to the blog. Twitter just takes up too much time. But it takes a fair amount of time. And it's sort of in addition to my jobs at IU. So it sort of has to be done in the cracks or evenings or weekends and things like that.
Yeah. How much time do you have to devote to your actual job?
Oh, my actual job is a full-time job with an S probably. It's like, even then, even if I only talked about my responsibilities at IU, they're more than enough. I spend a lot of time mentoring other faculty, still producing research, still writing papers, administrative roles. That takes up the full week. The stuff that I do in science communication is an and, not an or. But it is sometimes I feel like the most valuable thing that I do. And so it's important enough to try to make it all happen.
How much time do you spend working in total in a week?
Oh, God. Those are the kind of numbers you never want to say out loud. I don't know.
Is it an unhealthy amount?
Well, it depends what you mean by unhealthy, because I also spend a crazy amount of downtime. I play
Where
an
does
enormous
this time come from?
I play an enormous number of video games, and I play a lot with my kids, and still collect comic books, and I read a lot, and I watch a fair amount of TV. So, and I spend a lot of time with my family. I think that they would still argue that I'm not absent. So it's a full life. I will say that what's gotten interesting in the last few years is that I find I have to schedule my downtime almost as much as I have to schedule my work time just to make sure that I do it. And so one of the things I've done on the blog in the past few years, not so much this year, but in past years, was actually commit to learning new things or reading stuff, or like declaring this is what the skill I'm going to learn. Like one year I spent 2 months learning how to knit, and 2 months learning how to draw, and 2 months learning how to be a better cook. And there was another 2 months that now I can't remember, but I was truly committed to it, writing about it, trying to, because if I don't, I lose track of that stuff. So I'm very efficient, I think, with my time in general.
So you're organized.
Yes, very organized.
Okay,
I sort of
well, that's
know what's
something.
going to happen when. It's the kind of thing where it's like we don't miss deadlines. We never get stuck at the last second. I'm very regimented with writing the columns and having the scripts done. In my office, it's all erased now, but I have a board where I write down things that have to be done that week. And if the board is not erased by the end of the week, it's a problem. It's not long term. It's this week.
And you're a pediatrician as well. Are you practicing pediatrician?
So I see patients. I had clinic this morning, but it's a small percentage of my time. I'd say probably about 5. I'm in clinic about 2 times a month.
Why do you do this? And this is going back to the outreach, to the communication to the public. Why do you spend so much time communicating with the non-medical establishment, though you're also obviously communicating to them as well, in these various forms of media?
It's how we move the needle. I mean, it is how things might change, because these studies otherwise will exist in obscurity. There's a great anecdote. Gregor Mendel, who discovered Mendelian genetics, sort of the pea pod plants and how like genes work and how things are inherited. And he did all that research. He published it in a journal. He gave a few talks, and literally it was cited 4 times like in the next 20 years until it was rediscovered like in the early 20th century. I think it was the early 20th century. I mean, it was that long. It took decades for it to sort of get out there, because it's not enough to publish the paper and go to the meetings and talk about it. Until it gets out there, it doesn't exist. So we're trying to bridge a gap by trying to get this stuff out there so that people can act on it and hopefully have better healthcare system and better health.
You're doing it for the money, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's like, let's being a full-time journalist, it's still better to be a professor of pediatrics at high school medicine. So I have, I'm not a journalist. That's in the wings and on the side. There's not, any journalist will tell you, there's not a lot of money in journalism, let alone part-time journalism.
Yeah, well, I do it as a job.
Yeah, there you go. So it's like it's not the same. And so, no, I'm not doing it for the money.
Okay, well, somebody might assume, well, around the edges here. I mean, you're on the YouTube a lot. You could be driving some income streams. You do books.
It's all, don't get me wrong, money is good, and it's more money than no money, but none of them would replace my actual job.
Yeah.
And so the money is not the reason for doing
Well,
it.
I hate to be indelicate, but at the end of the year, how much can you expect from this activity? Like when you're scribbling in your budget, from
It's like vacations.
Okay.
we might get an extra vacation or 2 out of it.
Okay, that's fair.
Or I might buy some extra clothes, kind of thing. It's like I just might not worry about going out to that fancy restaurant once in a while. But it is not. It's not necessarily life-changing. Well, this is the thing too, and I say this knowing even the New York Times might hear this. Every year or 2, we go to the New York Times and we're like, can you get a raise? And they're always like, no. And then you're like, well, what am I going to do? I'm not in this for the money. I'm not. That's not the reason. And it's like, even if they gave me even more, it's not like that would be life changing. So it's,
But they do pay you, actually.
they do. Oh
Okay,
yeah, absolutely. And we make some money from Patreon or ad revenue for the YouTube show, and I do get paid by the column. It's a percentage, a smaller percentage of what I might actually make.
It still feels like this is more mission than...
Yes, there's no. I mean, truly. None of this is for the money. I mean, even the books. The books, I tell people all the time, it's fun to write the book because it's fun to have it, to hold it, to do it. Maybe you get a trip or two somewhere to like New York to do some media, which is fun, and then my wife will come with and she enjoys that. But for the amount of time that it takes, it is not worth the money. I mean, I'm not a best-selling, making gazillions of dollars author. So you're not going to do that. And the same thing with the Times. It's like for the amount of time that it takes. This sounds indelicate, but it's like it's certainly more cost-effective to be a physician than to do what I do on the side for science communication. It's not for the money.
Now, you recently said on your Twitter account that you write a lot about how the healthcare system fails us. I mean, you can just kind of go down the list of your articles for the New York Times,
absolutely,
and you can see articles that certainly could be contributed as being, if not completely critical, certainly skeptical of the medical profession. And I'm thinking about ones like doctors and racial bias.
Yeah.
Still a long way to go. Or it's hard for doctors to unlearn things.
Yep.
It's costly for us. Does that sometimes make you unpopular?
Everyone loves me right up until I train my lens on them. You get, like when I wrote one, I lose track, it might have been a year ago. It was about how they did a huge randomized controlled trial of stents and proved that for a lot of people that they don't need stents. And I can't tell you how many emails I got from cardiologists. Like, I usually like what you write, but this week you're way off base. And you could change up those emails for any specialty depending upon when I'm focused on them.
Yeah.
I think that it's very hard when it's about your stuff to be objective. And I don't mind people calling me out and disagreeing with me. In fact, I usually read all the comments because I need to learn too, and I'm not right about everything, certainly. But in general, I feel that people like the idea that that we're trying to bring science and evidence to light.
So when you're in the cafeteria, you're not having to dodge plates.
So but I will say, like, once in a while where I'll write something and someone will be like, "Oof, be careful walking to the car this week." I did anger people in IU because I remember years ago I wrote a column on artificial sweeteners, which again I keep coming back to, arguing that they're not nearly as unsafe as some people will hold. And given that sugar is terrible, if I had to choose, I would let my kids drink diet soda, and I do. And people lost their minds. And a couple researchers, I think even from IU, wrote an angry letter to the editor about, and that's fine. Everyone should, it's not that my voice should be heard and not others. Science should be discussed in the public sphere, just like this. But it didn't make me change my mind because I feel like I'd already answered their arguments, and I'd laid out the conclusions, and I'd explained why these small studies of rats are not the same thing as huge randomized controlled trials of hundreds or thousands of people. Those are two different things. And looking at a biologic marker is not the same as an outcome like obesity or heart disease.
You also spend a good amount of time talking about things that affect health that aren't like obviously biologic. Questions usually that are reserved for public policy, like when you write about gun safety. Or I think you recently had one that said that new abortion restrictions misunderstand the nature of pregnancy and the risk of miscarriage. Do you get criticized by some for what they see as you expressing a political point of view?
It depends what you mean by in trouble. It's like really in trouble? No. Yeah. Do I, sometimes people angry at me? Yes. I'd argue that let's take the gun column. The argument there was that a significant number of suicides and accidents in kids are guns that they obtain from their own home, and that we should probably do a better job of storing guns safely. Now, even when you talk to people who believe strongly in people's rights to own guns, they usually agree with that. I mean, they want responsible gun ownership. So that column didn't get much anger at all, because I wasn't saying let's stop restrictions. I'm saying, like, this is just sort of common sense stuff. Kids shouldn't get their hands on guns. Please make sure that you're thinking about how they're stored in your house so that they can't get their hands on them. And even people who own guns usually, no, there are probably some people that still disagree with that, but that's not usually where politics is. I mean, that's not what people are yelling about in the public sphere right now. That has much more to do with mass shootings. That has much more to do with how difficult it is to own a gun or what type of guns and everything else. And so those, I don't write as much about those because we don't have as much evidence on that. accidents are still the number one killer of children. Suicide and homicide are still major killers of adolescents. A lot of that is guns. And as a pediatrician, that's a focus. We're trying to do harm reduction. And so I wrote for a column once, like when I go to the doctor asks me if I'm having unprotected sex with anyone other than my wife. And I don't get angry because that's not their business. I know that's if I say yes, they're going to talk to me about harm reduction and things, and that's what we do as doctors sometimes. And I don't find that intrusive. That's part of being a doctor. And one of the things we do as pediatricians is ask kids about stuff that could be a danger to them. We warn them about proper water safety and proper bike safety and proper car safety, and drinking and driving, and guns are part of that as well.
Yeah. If you could only send out one more tweet or write one more column for the New York Times, is there one thing that you just really think you need to get out there?
Every time I write a book, I swear I'm not going to write another book. Like every time. But I feel like this burning passion recently, like I really want, and I got to find the time to write the proposal. But I would like to write a piece on what we get wrong in reporting health policy and health news and health research. Like the mistakes that we make in writing it up, the mistakes that we make in reporting it, the mistakes that we read in understanding it. Because I do believe at this point that I've got a pretty decent handle on the stuff we're doing wrong. And when I see it all the time, it drives me crazy because we could do a much better job of getting this information out there. That's the thing at the moment that I'd like to do.
That sounds like more than a tweet.
Yeah, that's definitely more than a tweet.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
My thanks again to Dr. Aaron Carroll. Hey, before you get on with the rest of your week, I wanted to draw your attention to a few other stories in this week's IBJ. Haley Colombo has another installment in her series One City, Worlds Apart. This week she's focusing on some of the reasons why low-income and working-class families in Indianapolis have trouble getting access to basic financial services like banking and checking accounts. And of course, without these things, it's harder to operate in our economy and build wealth and break out of the cycle of poverty. Also this week, Lindsay Erdoty explains how state and local officials are preparing for the 2020 census and why it's so important. There's nearly $18 billion in federal funding on the line. The fewer people who are counted, the less money we get. And Mickey Shuey has the latest on the Indy 11's plan to create a 20,000-seat soccer stadium. The team's owner scored a huge victory in April, winning approval for a funding mechanism for the stadium, but conversations with the city are just beginning. Again, you can read all about it in this week's print edition of IBJ, which you undoubtedly have delivered to your home or office. And as always, you can check them out online at ibj.com. And to have full and unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content, just hit the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbender. I'm Mason King, and we'll be back again next week.